I never thought I'd be the one holding all the cards. 20 years ago, I was just a scrawny kid from Albuquerque with a stutter, desperately trying to please a father who saw me as nothing but a disappointment. "You're worthless." Those words echoed through our house at least twice a week. The memory that haunts me most? My high school graduation. While other parents beamed with pride, my father leaned in and whispered, "Don't embarrass yourself up there, boy. We both know you barely made it." What he didn't know was that I graduated third in my class. But life has a way of flipping the script. Last month, I found myself sitting across from him at his company's board meeting. Not as his son, but as the deciding vote on whether his business would receive the $10 million loan he desperately needed. The loan that would save everything he'd built. His face when I walked in? That moment alone was worth the 20 years of therapy. This isn't a story about revenge, though. It's about how the person who tries to break you can unknowingly set you on the path to becoming exactly who you needed to be. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't getting even. It's choosing whether or not to be the bigger person when it matters most. Growing up in Albuquerque's North Valley in the 90s was a study in contrasts. Our neighborhood was modest but respectable, filled with working families striving for that elusive American dream. My father, Richard Mercer, owned a small but growing construction company that specialized in commercial projects. To everyone else, he was charming, reliable Rick, the guy who sponsored Little League teams and volunteered at Chamber of Commerce events. Home was different. At home, he was a perfectionist with a volcanic temper. My mother Diana was the buffer, always trying to soften his expectations for me and my younger sister Melissa. "Your father just wants the best for you," she'd say after particularly brutal criticism sessions about my grades, my physique, my hobbies, my friends. Everything I did was wrong, not enough, or embarrassing to him. I still remember my 11th birthday. Dad had promised to take me fishing at Elephant Butte Lake, a rare father-son trip I'd been looking forward to for weeks. The night before, his buddies from work called. They needed a fourth for golf. "Next weekend," he said, not even looking at me as he packed his clubs. My mother made cupcakes and tried to salvage the day, but I remember sitting on our back porch watching the sunset, wondering what was so fundamentally wrong with me that my own father would rather be anywhere else. By high school, I'd developed two protective mechanisms: academic excellence and invisibility. I kept my head down, studied relentlessly, and tried to take up as little space as possible at home. But even straight A's weren't good enough. "What about this A- in physics?" he'd demand, ignoring everything else. The worst came during my junior year. I'd finally made the debate team after months of practicing to control my stutter. Our team qualified for state finals in Santa Fe, and I needed my parents to sign the permission slip. Dad laughed when I showed it to him. "Debate? You can barely string two SS sentences together without sounding like a broken record," he mocked, exaggerating a stutter. He signed it, though, probably assuming I'd fail spectacularly. When I won second place in my category and our team took the state championship, he wasn't there. My mother took photos and bought me a celebration dinner at Garduno's, but his empty chairs spoke volumes. Through it all, Dad maintained one tradition, the grand gesture. Once a year, usually when guilt caught up with him, he'd do something extravagant. A new computer, an expensive jacket, concert tickets. Always very public, always designed to showcase what a generous father he was. I learned to dread these performances almost as much as his criticism. What nobody knew, the secret I carried through those years, was that I discovered the truth about his business when I was 16. Accidentally opening his home office computer one night, I found emails that revealed he'd been cutting corners on building materials and falsifying inspection reports. The Richard Mercer everyone admired was building his success on dangerous lies. I printed one email as insurance, then buried it in my copy of The Great Gatsby, terrified of what would happen if he found out I knew. By the way, I'm curious, where are you watching this video from? Drop your location in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Fast forward 12 years. I'd left New Mexico the day after high school graduation, putting as much distance as possible between myself and my father. Stanford on scholarship, then business school at MIT, followed by a steady climb through the ranks at a national investment firm. The stutter disappeared somewhere along the way. I rarely went home, Christmas every other year, brief calls to mom on Sundays, nothing more. That changed with my grandmother's 80th birthday. Mom insisted on a proper celebration at the family home in Albuquerque, all relatives required to attend. Your father's mellowed, she promised during our weekly call. His business is doing well. He's different now. I doubted that, but I couldn't say no to Grandma Rose. So on a scorching July weekend, I found myself driving a rental car from the Sunport to the old neighborhood, stomach knotting with each familiar landmark. The preparations were elaborate. A catered affair in the backyard with white tents, flowers everywhere, and at least 50 guests expected. Dad had spared no expense. His latest grand gesture, I supposed, this time for his mother-in-law. I arrived early to help set up, hoping to delay our first interaction as long as possible. No such luck. He emerged from the house as I was arranging chairs, looking older but still intimidating in his custom-tailored shirt and expensive watch. Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence, he called out, loud enough for others to hear. The prodigal son returns. Hello, Dad, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Place looks nice. Should be. Cost enough. He looked me up and down, assessing. You're looking corporate. Before I could respond, my sister Melissa rescued me, pulling me into a hug. Ignore him, she whispered. He's stressed about some business thing. The afternoon progressed with uncomfortable small talk and strategic avoidance. I helped Mom in the kitchen, chatted with cousins I barely recognized, and doted on Grandma Rose, who kept patting my cheek and telling everyone how handsome I'd become. The real tension began during dinner. Dad stood to make a toast, champagne glass raised toward his mother-in-law. To Rose, who's always been more of a parent to me than my own, he said, laying on the charm. And who raised the most wonderful woman I know. He smiled at my mother. Then he pivoted to me. And look, my son has returned from his important East Coast life to join us commoners. Even wearing a tie for the occasion. An uncomfortable chuckle rippled through the gathering. Harvard Business School, wasn't it? He continued, though he knew perfectly well I'd gone to MIT. MIT, I corrected quietly. Right. The slightly less impressive one. He smiled, making it seem like gentle ribbing to others, but I recognized the familiar pattern of public humiliation. My cousin Jake, always oblivious, made it worse. Didn't you just get some big promotion? He asked me loudly. All eyes turned my way. Yeah, I acknowledged reluctantly. I'm heading up a new division that specializes in business recovery loans. Fancy title for a glorified bank teller, Dad quipped, generating more uncomfortable laughter. I might have let it go, had been letting it go for decades, but then came the thunderbolt that changed everything. My phone buzzed with an email. Normally I wouldn't check during a family event, but something made me glance down. The subject line, Mercer Construction Loan Application, your review needed. I nearly dropped my phone. My division. My approval. My father's company was applying for a major loan through my department. And not just any loan, this was crisis financing. As I quickly scanned the details, I realized his business was on the verge of collapse. I looked up to find him watching me, his expression suddenly wary. He didn't know yet. Couldn't know yet. But something in my face must have changed. Everything okay there, big shot? He asked, the familiar mocking tone now tinged with something else, anxiety perhaps. Fine, I said, pocketing my phone as my mind raced with implications. Just work. Always work with you, isn't it? He pressed, gaining confidence. Never could understand the concept of family time. The irony was almost too much to bear. As the party continued, I found myself hyper-aware of his every movement. He was working the crowd, the consummate host, but I noticed new details, the slight fraying at his cuff, the way he reused the same plastic champagne glass instead of opening another bottle, the tension around his eyes when he thought no one was looking. He was broke. The man who had belittled me my entire life was now unwittingly dependent on my decision for his survival. By the way, if you're enjoying this story, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. And now, back to the party from hell. The evening progressed with increasing tension. Dad cornered me by the dessert table, suddenly friendly. You know, son, we should grab lunch before you head back east. Catch up properly. I've been following your career from afar, very impressed. 24 hours earlier, this olive branch might have meant something. Now it felt calculated, though he couldn't possibly know yet about the loan application crossing my desk. Then came the moment that pushed me over the edge. As guests began to leave, Dad gathered everyone for a final toast. He presented Grandma Rose with an envelope. A week in Hawaii, he announced grandly. First class all the way for you and Diana. Applause all around. Another grand gesture. But I'd seen the loan application. He couldn't afford this. He was borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, maintaining appearances while his business crumbled. As the clapping died down, he slung an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close in a show of fatherly affection that felt alien and wrong. And maybe my successful son here will finally make time to visit his old man more often, he said loudly. Show me some of those fancy business tricks. Something in me snapped. Why don't we start right now? I said, my voice carrying across the yard. The remaining guests turned to look at us, champagne glasses still raised. Dad's arm stiffened around my shoulder. What's that, son? Business tricks, I said, stepping away from his grip. Let's talk about your business, Dad. Mercer Construction. How are things really going? His face hardened, smile frozen in place for the audience. Thriving as always. This isn't the time. Actually, it's the perfect time, I continued, feeling 20 years of suppressed anger rising like floodwater. Because it's quite a coincidence. Your loan application came across my desk today. The color drained from his face. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in atmosphere. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. $10 million in emergency business recovery funding. That's what Mercer Construction is applying for, right? Because you're 3 months from bankruptcy. I turned to face our relatives and friends. Did everyone know that? That the Hawaii trip and this whole party is just another one of Dad's famous smoke and mirrors shows. That's enough, he hissed, grabbing my arm. I shook him off. You know what's funny? For years I thought I was the failure in this family. The disappointment. You're worthless, remember? Your favorite phrase. Grandma Rose was staring at us, her birthday celebration disintegrating before her eyes. Mom had her hand over her mouth. But I couldn't stop now. Tell them how you did it, Dad. Tell them how you've been cutting corners on materials for years. Using substandard concrete, skipping required reinforcements, falsifying inspection reports. You're making this up, he sputtered, but his eyes betrayed his panic. He's making this up. I pulled out my phone. Should I read the loan application details out loud? The part about multiple pending litigation threats and potential criminal charges, ? The backyard had fallen completely silent. Even the cicadas seemed to pause their summer chorus. Or maybe, I continued, I should tell them about the email I found when I was 16. The one where you instructed your site manager to substitute grade B materials after the inspector had signed off on grade A. The one I printed and kept all these years, just in case. Dad lunged toward me, his control finally broken. You little, my cousin Jake stepped between us. Whoa, Rick, take it easy. He's lying. Dad shouted, pointing at me. He's always been jealous, always trying to undermine me. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never noticed before. The great Richard Mercer was terrified. I'm not the one who's been lying, I said quietly. I'm not the one who spent years pretending to be successful while actually endangering people's lives with substandard buildings. And I'm certainly not the one who's about to lose everything because his past is finally catching up with him. My mother approached slowly. Is this true, Rick? Are we in trouble? The facade cracked completely. It's just temporary cash flow issues, he stammered. All businesses have them. Once this loan comes through, he turned to me, his expression shifting from rage to something worse, pleading. Once the loan comes through, everything will be fine. The realization of his position, that I controlled his fate, visibly dawned on him. In that moment, our roles completely reversed. "You need my approval," I said, the words heavy with implication. The party was effectively over. Guests mumbled awkward goodbyes, hurrying to their cars. Only family remained: Mom, Melissa, Grandma Rose, and a few stunned cousins. Dad's next words shocked me more than anything that came before. "Please," he whispered, and I saw tears in his eyes for the first time in my life. "Please don't destroy everything I've built." I looked around at the wreckage of Grandma's birthday party, at my mother's devastated expression, at the man who had systematically torn down my self-worth for years, now reduced to begging. "I'm leaving now," I said, turning toward the house. "I'll be in touch about the loan decision." As I walked away, I heard him call after me, his voice breaking. "Son, wait." But I didn't wait. I grabbed my overnight bag from the guest room and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, Mom appeared beside me. "Whatever you're going to do," she said softly, "remember that it affects all of us, not just him." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat, and walked out into the warm New Mexico night. The next 48 hours were a blur. I checked into the Hotel Angeles downtown instead of staying at the family home as planned. My phone exploded with messages, frantic texts from Dad, worried calls from Mom, confused questions from Melissa. I responded to none of them, needing time to think. The loan application sat in my digital queue, demanding a decision. Professional ethics required that I recuse myself due to the obvious conflict of interest, but I had 3 days before I was officially required to flag it. 3 days to decide what kind of man I wanted to be. I spent the first day walking around Old Town Albuquerque, places from my childhood that held memories both painful and occasionally sweet. The Church Street Cafe where Mom would take me for sopapillas after dentist appointments. The plaza where I'd once won a chess tournament, waiting futilely for Dad to show up and see my trophy. The Rio Grande flowing lazy and brown, where I'd escape to read books and dream of leaving. On the second morning, an unexpected text arrived from Jake. "Coffee? I think there's stuff you should know." We met at Satellite Coffee on Central. Jake had always been peripheral in my life. A cousin who appeared at holidays, nothing more. But as we sat across from each other, he revealed a parallel narrative I'd never known. "Your dad's been covering for his brother, your Uncle Steve, for years," Jake explained. "Steve's gambling problem, the money he embezzled from their first company. Rick took the fall for all of it." "Why would he do that?" I asked, struggling to reconcile this information with the father I knew. Family loyalty misplaced as it was. Steve threatened suicide if Rick didn't help. Then it spiraled, one cover-up led to another. The corners he cut in construction weren't greed so much as desperation. "That doesn't excuse endangering people's lives," I argued. "No," Jake agreed. "It doesn't. But there's more to the story than you know." Later that day, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Carlos Martinez, Dad's former site manager. "Your father fired me 5 years ago when I refused to falsify a safety report," he explained. "But what you might not know is that he went back afterward and fixed everything at his own expense. He's been doing that for years, cutting corners initially, then secretly remedying the worst issues out of his own pocket." "Why would he do that?" I asked for the second time that day. "Pride," Carlos said simply. He couldn't admit failure, but he couldn't live with himself either. It's been killing him slowly. By evening, another piece of the puzzle arrived. An email from Melissa containing scanned medical records. Dad had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's 3 years ago. His increasing financial desperation coincided with his realization that his working years were numbered. "He didn't want any of us to know," Melissa wrote. "Especially not you. He didn't want you to come back out of pity." The third morning, I made a decision. I formally recused myself from the loan application and called my colleague Devin, explaining the situation in strict confidence. "The application has merit," I told him. "The business itself is sound, despite past issues. But I want 3 non-negotiable conditions attached. First, a complete safety audit of all buildings constructed by Mercer in the past decade, with funds allocated for any necessary remediation. Second, my father would step down as CEO, remaining as a consultant during transition to new management. Third, a portion of company profits would establish a scholarship fund for disadvantaged students interested in ethical business practices and construction safety. Then I drove to my parents' house. Dad answered the door looking 10 years older than he had at the party. The confident facade was gone. In its place stood a trembling man with fear in his eyes. "I've come to talk," I said. We sat in his study, the same room where I'd found that damning email as a teenager. I laid out what I'd learned about Uncle Steve, about the remediation efforts, about his diagnosis. He confirmed it all, too exhausted to deny anything. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked finally. He stared at his hands, which trembled slightly. "How could I? After everything, after the way I treated you. I couldn't bear for you to see me weak." "That's not weakness," I said. "Weakness was tearing down your son instead of facing your own failures." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." I explained the loan conditions I'd recommended. He listened without interruption. "It's more than I deserve," he said when I finished. "It's not about what you deserve," I replied. "It's about what's right for the business, for the people who work there, and for this family." That evening, the entire family gathered for dinner, not a celebration, but a reckoning. Mom, Melissa, Grandma Rose, and Dad. I told them everything, including my role in the loan decision and the conditions attached. There were tears, recriminations, and finally, tentative steps toward understanding. The unexpected twist came 2 weeks later. The forensic accountant reviewing Mercer Construction's books discovered that Uncle Steve had been embezzling again, this time from Dad's company. The gambling addiction had never been resolved. This revelation explained the rapid financial deterioration that had puzzled even my father. With Steve's deception exposed, the path forward clarified. The loan was approved with my recommended conditions. Dad began treatment for his Parkinson's, no longer hiding his condition. The scholarship fund was established, named not after our family but after Carlos Martinez, whose integrity had stood firm when tested. As for me, I took a temporary leave from my position in Boston and stayed in New Mexico to help with the transition. Working alongside my father, now as colleagues rather than adversaries, we began the slow, painful process of rebuilding both the business and our relationship. One afternoon, as we reviewed plans for a new project, a community center in a low-income South Valley neighborhood, Dad looked up from the blueprints. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About you. About everything. You were never worthless. I was just too blind to see your worth." It wasn't a grand gesture. There were no witnesses, no performative element. Just a quiet acknowledgement between two men finding their way towards something that might, with time and effort, resemble respect. The grand gesture that had been planned for Grandma Rose, the Hawaii trip, did eventually happen, but with a difference. We all went, the entire family, Dad's trembling hand held firmly in Mom's as he faced his fear of showing vulnerability. On the beach at sunset, I watched him laugh with Melissa's children, his grandsons he barely knew, and saw glimpses of the father he might have been, might still become in whatever time remained to him. That was 5 years ago. Today, Mercer Construction operates under new management, with Dad serving as a special advisor when his health permits. The safety audit revealed fewer problems than feared. His secret remediation efforts had addressed the worst issues, but the transparency of the process restored community trust that had been silently eroding. I eventually returned to Boston but visit Albuquerque quarterly, for both business and family reasons. Dad's condition has progressed, but treatment has slowed its advance. We talk weekly now, conversations that are sometimes still awkward but no longer hostile. We're learning, haltingly, how to be father and son. The scholarship program has sent 17 students to college so far, including 2 from the South Valley who now work for Mercer Construction. I serve on its selection committee alongside Carlos Martinez, who agreed to return as safety compliance officer. Uncle Steve finally got the help he needed for his gambling addiction after hitting rock bottom. He works in the company mailroom now, a humble position he accepted as part of his recovery process. As for me, I discovered something unexpected in the midst of all this upheaval. Compassion doesn't require forgetting, but it does demand understanding. My father was a deeply flawed man who inflicted real damage, but he was also someone struggling with his own demons, making terrible choices from a place of fear and pride. The words, "you're worthless," no longer echo in my mind. They've been replaced by different words, the ones Dad spoke to me last month when I told him I was starting my own investment firm focused on ethical business recovery. "I'm proud of you," he said. His voice was weaker now, affected by his condition, but the words came through clearly. "I always have been, even when I couldn't show it." I don't know if that's entirely true. Memory has a way of rewriting itself to ease present pain, but I choose to accept the sentiment for what it is, a bridge from who we were to who we're trying to become. The loan that saved his company wasn't just about money. It was about recognizing that sometimes, saving someone means helping them face consequences while still offering a path forward. It means holding them accountable while still holding space for redemption. There's power in forgiveness, but there's even greater power in transformation, in allowing difficult truths to change both the forgiver and the forgiven. My father is not the man he was. Neither am I. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. If you've stayed with me through this story, perhaps you have your own complicated family dynamics, your own wounds that need healing. Remember that understanding doesn't mean excusing. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And sometimes, the person who hurt you the most is fighting battles you know nothing about. The most meaningful changes rarely come as dramatic confrontations, though those moments may be catalysts. Real change happens in the quiet aftermath, in the daily decisions to do better, be better, even when no one is watching. If you found value in this story, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your comments mean everything. They remind me why sharing these difficult journeys matters. And if you have your own story of family reconciliation, I'd be honored to hear it in the comments below. Until next time, remember, your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. It never was.